So what specific questions you have in mind?
Well, I've been looking at a lot of these objects from the museums. So
Oh,
a lot of
okay.
these objects I've been looking at are like from different parts of the Philippines, and they have a bunch in Berkeley, specifically in like the Phoebe Hearst Museum. And so I was talking to there were some from Bukidnon where I'm from, and I talked to some of the elders about some of their ideas, and I don't know if you've seen some of the objects.
I have seen a lot
Yeah,
at the Field Museum in
and
Chicago,
the field.
and I know that Berkeley
Uh-huh.
has a lot. I did not see it.
Yeah.
They even brought an Ifugao house.
Oh wow.
I don't know exactly if it is in Berkeley or UCLA.
Mm. But I guess I'm curious, just on your own personal perspective about museums in general, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
this is a very, again, people have different feelings about it, and
Yeah.
depending on who I talk to, depending on the tribes where a lot of the, objects come from, um, they have specific feelings about it. Like I know in the Bukidnon they were saying like some of those objects are sacred and they should not be there. But I know for you as an Ifugao and seeing some of these Ifugao objects in museums, I was curious about how you feel about that in general as you
Yeah,
know.
my feeling is that it's not really right to get something that's functional. It, the tribe had been using it. They made it for a function, but you get it just to show. They're not for show. But I'm not against it. At least it creates awareness for people who see. But personally, I would not like my something I made to use to be displayed. It's okay if they remove that uh, idea, the notion that these tribal people are uncivilized and in a lower class. Because look, our things are better than them. So when there's comparison without respect, that's what I don't like.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I see that because a lot of these were taken from way back when, and I'm
Mhm.
assuming that maybe like this is before I was born, and I don't know, maybe before maybe you are, but I was curious, like growing up, did you have any kind of awareness? We were like anthropologists, like going in the village, or kind of people doing like coming to your village, and like did you have some kind of direct experience where there were anthropologists and how they acquired maybe some objects too
Mhm.
from your family? I don't know if you've heard stories about what it was like, because I know in the Ifugao there was a lot of anthropologists, like American anthropologists that came. So I don't know if you have any stories that you experienced personally or shared with you by your.
I do have personal experience. The first American who did anthropological writings about the Ifugao is Roy Barton. I think he was a teacher, but he did anthropological writings. And he was followed by Otley Bayer and then Harold Conklin expanded the work of both Barton and Bayer. He wrote the Ifugao Atlas, and his research station is actually the village where I was born. My father was his main research informer and language teacher. So I played with his two children when we were growing up. They collected some of our uh, artifacts. It's called artifacts, but it's really, like I said earlier, they are functional, like bowls, law stools, we call Chalapong. When Harold Conklin died, and I was invited to do a ritual for him, I shared my feeling. I did not have the kind of understanding before, of course, because I did not learn about researchers or all these university professors who go to indigenous communities and do studies. But what I shared is that when I was growing up, I actually have some anger toward Harold Conklin, but it's very personal because I like to play with my father, but my father had to go and earn, so he has to go. And when they do overtime work, my father will not come home until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. So he will sleep for a short while, and then in the morning we will leave to go work again. So one day I asked him, I said, I like to play with you. Why do you keep on going to Conklin? And said, so I will earn, so we will have food. And I was adamant. I said, I like to play with you. And he said, oh, the American will get angry. And I was disappointed because I thought my father is the strongest and most powerful one, and there's somebody more powerful than him. So I was sort of angry at that. At a young age, I have that kind of anger. And then when I went to high school, I learned about the rights of workers. That there's supposed to be an overtime pay. So when I was in high school, I was critical of Harold Conklin. Said, oh, my father never had, and the other workers, they did not have overtime pay, it's just regular pay. And then when I went to college, especially after I came here and took my master's degrees, I learned about how professors, university professors, have to do research. Or you are familiar with the publish or perish. That is why they go and do research. So they get tenure or their salary increase. What about the source of information? They don't have any salary to be increased. So I teach those professors in front of me. I said, you are making use of indigenous knowledge to gain tenure and get promotion. Uh, it is good now because they have this FPIC. Are familiar with that?
What does that mean?
Free and informed prior consent.
Mm.
Or FPIC, free prior informed consent.
Mm.
That you have to ask permission before you uh, get their knowledge, and they acknowledge more the informers, research informers. So we are
Getting there,
uh,
yeah. Yeah,
better.
when I talked to some of the elders from Bukidnon, like we had to do a ritual, like that I was like asking questions because like I'm also like it's very interesting, like you were saying, being in a master's because to me all is this like new for me, I've never been to school here in this country. So I felt like also like becoming like the role of I don't know if you're feeling like a native informant because then I'm like kind of bringing them to this space where it's like maybe whatever is being produced will sort of become part of that like as a university like extraction, right? This is kind of like a form of extraction of knowledge, wisdom. But I was curious because I know some of the elders of Bukidnon were mentioning that they do some kind of they said payment, but they don't mean it in a monetary way, you know, like it's almost like an offering to nature, like, you know, like all the people that are seeking information, knowledge, like they have to make an offering, right? Like it's more about like bringing your intention. And I was just curious in Ifugao and for you especially, like, you know, what would you say is the right way to go about for people who want to? Because I know there's a lot of people that are interested. Like some people are born here, but they're like Filipino background, but also they are curious, you know. So like how to sort of engage with that knowledge without purely being that
Yeah,
like
without
extractive or like
inflicting damage
yes,
or
yeah. So how do you go about like the right way, would you say, like for you, like what would be if someone was to
I
like
meant
someone out there right now wanted to learn more and you know.
yeah, I mentioned earlier about respect. I think that's the most important part. Uh, Respect to me is not just getting the knowledge because you have that, it's a requirement in the university, but you go there and actually feel what the people or how the people live their lives. So it's not just for knowledge purposes, but when you really feel and understand, uh, there is respect in that. And I would, if I am a professor at the university, I would take my students field work or invite those wisdom keepers, indigenous people, if you like to use their knowledge, invite them to come to the university. Uh, there's contact between the original source of knowledge uh, to the students.
I like that. No, that's an important thing because like what I'm also realizing because of the technology, it's been possible that like you know that the people that let's say like even that like you know you and maybe the students can have like you know because it always feels like a lot of times there's a middle man in some ways like you know like it's usually a lot of like in the non-profit like kind of sector people sort of like it's become like these the structure of it is usually if people are interested in like keeping in touch with the indigenous population and the folks and elders you have to go through like it's like everywhere like it's who you know and I was like curious about too in your experience in just like since you've been here in the States, you know, if you're like have any kind of experiences with like how I guess like those organizations sort of can help in those, you know, because I feel like it's usually from what I know a lot of it's funding is important like you know like people need to be sustained right like everybody needs to be able to sustain but I'm just curious in what other ways do you feel that it's helpful the structures like you know the kind of like non-profit organizations do you think it's helpful for those communities do you feel that um, it's still significant to have those like structures that these people are in charge you know or like people can just like directly reach out because I think that's also the thing right the technology really brings people directly to like because I'm saying this because in the elders like you know in Bukidnon somehow the professors I had they were thinking like oh maybe they want to like live like this but then when you talk to them they want internet you know they want good Wi-Fi they want to be able to go on the internet and so it's this like you were saying maybe like a romanticized kind of
Mm-hmm.
idea of how indigenous population should be like you know like the happy native or they're just gonna be there and without any internet but I guess in some ways like you know is the importance there it seems like in just really listening to what the needs are but in your community I was wondering if maybe I guess you could identify some direct needs is that does that make sense like a
Mm-hmm.
question like you know like a direct need that like you know because people always like we want to help but I'm like
Yeah,
but we don't know
yeah. Again, it. goes back to that respect. Uh, if you go and do research and you compensate those people, uh, there has to be some respect involved
Mm,
because it's easy for those people in villages to feel inferior
yeah.
uh, because you have that money and
Yeah.
money becomes power. Like
Yeah.
the one paying them is
Yeah.
higher, and that's not right. But from my perspective now, sharing knowledge is good. Yeah, it's good to share knowledge. If it helps us human to be happier and healthier, it helps the earth, it helps sustainable life, then it's good.
Yeah.
Share.
Yeah. And again,
Guys, whether it's structured or however it is shared, the
yeah.
knowledge,
Part
go
part
for it.
I think part of me is really interested in the storytelling, and that's also like when you were like talking yesterday about the dap. I think it really resonated with me because I think a lot of things is storytelling, right? And like how like children learn through storytelling. I was wondering if you can tell me the significance of storytelling in your life and just like how it's like, you
The
know.
charge of this hearing aid is again gone, so I
Oh, it's
cannot
okay.
hear you well.
I was wondering if you can share the significance of storytelling in your life
Uh-huh,
and
uh-huh.
how it's like shifted or moved you through your life from when you were young until an
Yeah,
adult. Like, like before you were a listener and now you are like a teller,
uh-huh.
or that kind of transition, how significant, especially to the culture.
Yeah, many cultures in the world use story to pass on knowledge, and it's good because it's easy to remember when they use story to hand down knowledge. Uh, I did a lot of listening. Yes, when I was growing up, I will go with my father when he goes to attend rituals, perform rituals, and during apui when you build a fire and you sit around the fire and you listen to elders. It's, now I feel I am that elder telling stories. It's a responsibility. Uh, it's a good like foundation for children. When they grow up, they have a choice, to whether uh, keep the tradition on how to hand down, transfer knowledge, whether to write or use video or just person to person storytelling. So I feel honor and fortunate to still be alive and have the chance to share. And I could not be a teacher or wisdom keeper without somebody listening. Although I take that idea that uh, an old person is like a guru. It's not necessarily like that because there are young people who carry a lot of knowledge. So it's good to listen to both young and older people, so long as there's respect.
Appreciate that. No, thank you. One last question, because I mean, I have a lot of questions, but just for the recording, because I know as an artist, like like yourself, I struggle sometimes with the feeling of like what art should be, because like especially like after going taking an MFA, it feels like they want you to be an artist, like in a
Mm-hmm.
museum, do like gallery. I was just like maybe you can talk a little bit about your journey, because I know you were that kind of artist too,
Yeah.
and then like how that's shifted for you, especially the spiritual dimension in which you now like also operate.
I don't know exactly the year when they start, labeling all this knowledge, segregating them into, anthropology or art or whatever specialization. Uh, there is no such description in the past. People just make something because it makes them happy and usually functional. But later on, we consider it as art, and there is this argument or school of thought differentiating craft and art. It's more, I guess, to put those who went to college a little higher than skilled craftsmen. To me, there's no distinction. It's just the way you learn your trade that is different. Because I did not have a formal education doing art, but I followed the traditional way of doing carving, for example, or stonework. It's not my place to describe my work, whether it is craft or art. I just enjoy what I do. Uh, that's what mattered the most to me.
That's a beautiful way of putting it.
Did you get what you were
Yeah, no,
expecting?
yeah, no, yeah, no. I mean, I feel like it's so validating to hear it because I struggle with this because like especially now the question is like I always feel like, oh, I don't want to be that kind of artist, but then the thing is like, what if they want you, right? Because now the institutions are embracing, let's say, these kinds of maybe work that before they were not like, right? And now that a lot of those institutions are like, oh, like person of color, indigenous artists, like so they're now opening their doors, but it's
Hmm.
still their space, right? They're just kind of creating this space for you. So I guess that's for me always the challenge, right? Like, what if like someone like they want you, right? Like, you're not gonna like how would you take that if let's say like a museum, like an institution that maybe like before like oh we're not gonna show this, so they shifted, right? But maybe it's also strategic because they wanna like maintain that power and prestige of the institution. So they but I guess for you, I was curious of how do you create those boundaries? Do you have boundaries even?
Uh, no,
Yeah.
like I said earlier, I just enjoy my work. I don't even like to have a title, Mumbaki or artist. Or, it's another form of separation, putting wall, uh, creating hierarchy. Uh, I, I don't uh, really care if I'm just called Lagitan,
Lagitan. You are Lagitan.
not a Mumbaki or shaman. It feels like somebody that's higher than you.
But I feel like I think that is the difference because like an authentic like I guess like person that like wouldn't aspire for that position, right? If it's like an authentic kind of like from authentic place, like it's not something that you seek, right? And it almost like you're almost like an example, like you're just reflecting that in your actions and who you are, and you don't need that like that title. And I appreciate that, Mamerto. I really appreciate that.
uh,
Thank you so much. I mean, I feel like also just like when you talk, I think about listening. I think that is something that a lot of people sometimes they think they do, but sometimes it's like the idea of listening sometimes have a different meaning for different people because there is also like maybe most of the time people have an agenda which is fine, but at the same time when you are overthinking like things, then it actually prevents you from really listening, because you're just listening to your reaction and your thoughts to something or a situation instead of really like listening. um, and I think in my life that's always been a lesson. I think like the listening part. Yeah, it's always been a great lesson for me in my life, like listening, but to find that place also of just really like taking in and being open to things, you know. Because
Mhm.
I feel like, yeah, I'm educated, but I'm also doing a lot of unlearning. I feel like the more I feel like educated in paper, the less I know, because that is just one way of knowing. But I find myself like, you know, like what it was doing was it making me doubt a lot of the intuition that I have always had, you know. Like I felt like I was fine until I have to explain myself,
Uh-huh.
kind of, if that makes sense, you know.
Yes.
It's like I was fine until I had to
Yeah.
explain it. It's like, um, but yeah, I appreciate that.
That this educational system that's based on competition, it has a lot of benefits, this modern education, but there are also negative result. You know, it's a competition because the testing alone is a form of competition. When you get a higher grade than your classmate, you feel good, but that classmate of yours feel like they are inferior. They don't know anything. So aspiring, it should be aspiring to be a better person
Yeah.
instead of aspiring to get that title and recognition, and use that education to earn. There's always this money and recognition or power. If you talk to uh, shamans who are just doing their work, healing work or performing rituals, they just do it because that's their role without aspiring for an honor, recognition, and payment. That's what I like to. That's how I like to live my life. I enjoy doing the work I do. It's good to have an exchange, either in the form of material, money, or just bartering, trading labor. That's enough for me.
Thank you so much, Mamerto. I really appreciate, like, I'm gonna turn it off. Um, or maybe you can just tell me your name, I guess, just for the sake of, and just kind of.
You got enough, plenty.